Legendary Pokemon are some of the strongest and most important pieces in competitive play. So powerful, in fact, that most of them aren't allowed for the majority of the VGC season. These Pokemon that are often banned are called restricted Pokemon. They're often on the cover of the video games or have some sort of relation to the Pokemon that is on the cover. This means that Kyogre and Groudon are restricted Pokemon, and so is Rayquaza, as they form a trio. Now, there are some exceptions to this, as there are only so many games and so many covers. Mewtwo is a restricted Pokemon coming from Generation 1, as well as Terapagos and the Calyrex Riders coming from the DLCs in their respective games. Also, Cosmog and Cosmoem, but please don't use those. With that being said, not every legendary is a restricted Pokemon. A Pokemon like Urshifu, for example, is a legendary and has oppressive competitive results, but it is not a restricted Pokemon. This is because restricted Pokemon isn't a term created by the community similar to pseudo-legendary. It is actually a restriction put on certain Pokemon by the developers themselves. So because Urshifu wasn't blatantly overpowered on paper like the Calyrex Riders or Terapagos, it didn't earn the title of restricted Pokemon despite being so oppressive. So this means while Pokemon like Xerneas or Kyogre are banned, that these side legendary Pokemon get a chance to shine. Big up Zapdos. Zapdos is amazing. But when these restricted Pokemon are legal, you basically lose if you don't have the required amount on your team. Currently in Regulation I, you are allowed 2 restricted legendary Pokemon on each team. And just a little while ago, you were only allowed 1. And if you look back throughout history at all of the competitive results while these restricted Pokemon were legal, you will never find teams that win anything having no restricted Pokemon. And the reasoning for this is just because they are powerful enough to win battles on their own. Of course, it typically takes a good player to pilot the team and put their restricted legendary in the correct position to win the game, or haha funny horse click button. Yeah, we're starting to Calyrex hate this early in the video. But what are the aspects of these legendary Pokemon that make them as powerful as they are? Well, we can get the obvious one out of the way first, and that is base stats. The majority of these Pokemon are just so unbelievably powerful in the numbers department that it doesn't matter what else they have. Because when you have 150 base speed or 170 base attack, it can cover up any weaknesses that you might have. Alright, I lied, Kyurem Black has a lot of weaknesses. But that is an exception to the rule. Because if you're building your team around hitting strong ground-type attacks, what is the reasoning to use something like a Landorus over a Groudon? Because when it comes down to it, some of these Pokemon just have absolutely insane attacking stats, as well as the HP and defenses to stay on the field for a very long time. But now that we're past the part of the video where we say this Pokemon is strong because numbers, we can get into the other information. But before we do, I just want to say if you're new here and you're liking the video so far, please consider subscribing. You of course don't have to, but it does help me bring more content to you. Anyways, back to the video. So what we've talked about so far is why to use these restricted legendary Pokemon over other Pokemon. But of course, in a format where they're legal, you're supposed to use them over other Pokemon. The hard part is trying to decide which restricted legendary or which 2 restricted legendaries you want to use on your team. And no matter how many restricted legendaries are allowed, you're always going to want to build around one of them. This is the Pokemon that I like to think of as the engine of the team. The Pokemon that's going to enable your other Pokemon while also enabling itself. And a great way for a restricted to do this is through its ability. Now take some of the best of all time in Groudon and Kyogre, and what they have in common is having 2 of the best enabling abilities in the history of VGC. Now Groudon has Drought, which sets up the sunlight, and Kyogre has Drizzle, which sets up the rain. This means that just by touching the field, these 2 restricted legendaries set up their team's archetype on the first turn, which means that they instantly get value for their teammates that may benefit from these weather conditions. Now the bonuses that the legendaries themselves get are a little bit different. Kyogre being in the rain means that its powerful water-type moves get a 1.5 times power bonus. Stacking this on top of the fact that Kyogre is already a water-type means that its moves double in power when it's in the rain. But Groudon is a ground-type, which means that offensively, the sun doesn't help it much at all. Now we have seen Groudon use special fire-type moves in the past, but of course with that massive physical attack stat, you want to remain physical. Groudon's bonus in the sun is that it weakens the power of water-type moves, which are super effective against it. This means the Groudon will only be weak to grass and ice, which are both weak to fire. And of course, since Groudon sets the sun up, the chances of it having a fire-type teammate are very high. This means that teams with Groudon as the engine do a very good job of protecting it. This partnered with the fact that these 2 legendaries have abilities that counter each other, it's no secret why they've been at the top of the metagame for years. But with the new addition of the Generation 9 Legendary Dragons, we have seen these abilities take a turn. With the addition of Koraidon and the ability Orichalcum Pulse, we see a more offensive version of Drought. This is no longer being used for defensive reasons as much as it is offensive, because Orichalcum Pulse gives Koraidon a 30% boost in its attack stat. This combined with the terastallization into fire, this gives Koraidon a much more threatening single target version of what Groudon brings. Its counterpart in Miraidon sets up the electric terrain and gets that same 30% boost but to its special attack stat. These abilities, in combination with the fact that Groudon and Kyogre are much slower than Miraidon and Koraidon, it allows these legendary Pokemon to coexist because they play different roles. There are some legendary Pokemon that you do not build teams around their abilities, but they are very useful. Terapagos, for example, has the ability Terra Shell, which weakens the first attack it takes when it's at full health and makes it not very effective. But when it terastallizes, it gains the ability Terraform Zero, which cleanses the effects of all weather and terrain that are on the field, which is a direct counter to the 4 legendaries we've talked about so far. A more toned down version of this is Rayquaza with the ability Airlock, meaning that all the weather effects are nullified while the user is on the field. The dogs from Gen 8 and Zacian and Zamazenta gain a +1 boost to their respective stats, meaning that when Zacian enters the field for the first time, it gains +1 to its attack stat, and Zamazenta gains a +1 to its defense stat. Now, none of these Pokemon have bad abilities per se, but some do have fairly useless abilities. The Kyurem fusions with Zekrom and Reshiram get an ability similar to Mold Breaker, meaning that they can attack without the effects of abilities. Meaning that they can one-shot Pokemon through Sturdy, and they can, in theory, use a priority move against a priority blocking ability like Armor Tail. This very rarely comes in handy, and it is a very niche option. Multiple of these Pokemon get the ability Pressure, namely Eternatus, and the Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum legendaries in Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina all get the ability Telepathy. Now, Telepathy stops your teammates from hitting you, which is inherently a very good ability, but it is very niche and almost never seen. Although being able to click the move Earthquake with no repercussions is always a good thing. And to round this off, we have a bunch of Pokemon with very good abilities that fit more into that secondary slot. These Pokemon can be your solo restricted, but you wouldn't see a team built around them in the way that those engine type abilities would. First we have Shadow Shield, which is the signature ability of Lunala. Now this is the exact same as Lugia's multi-scale ability, as it halves the damage of the first attack you take. However, Lunala's ability is not ignored by the effects of Turbo Blaze, Terravolt, or Mold Breaker, whereas Lugia's is. I'm really not entirely sure why the interaction on these two is different, as they're the same exact ability, the only thing that changes is a name, but clearly Game Freak had a favorite Psychic-type legendary. And the last ability we're going to talk about is of course the Calyrex Riders that get access to the As One ability. This combines the Unnerve ability of something like a Mewtwo, as well as a physical and special Moxie when they knock out an opposing Pokemon. This means that on the last turn of a game, you can have a +3 Calyrex launching an attack into your final Pokemon. So, to recap, we have the engine abilities of the weather and terrain, which allow you to build an entire team around it, which become increasingly stronger when you find out that they added Paradox Pokemon with the abilities Protosynthesis and Quark Drive, which improve their stats when they're on these effects. You have the more selfish abilities in Intrepid Sword and Dauntless Shield from Zacian and Zamazenta, as well as One on the Calyrex Riders. And then you have the general use and staying power abilities such as Shadow Shield on Lunala or Telepathy on the Gen 4 legendaries that allow you to stay on the field for longer. Also, shout out to Ho-Oh, who is climbing in usage right now and has the Regenerator ability, which restores 30% of your HP when you switch out and switch back in. So as we know, some of those abilities are very strong, but some of them walk the line between useless and useful. Would you rather use an Eternatus with Pressure, or would you rather just go with a Miraidon who has Hadron Engine? And in a similar fashion, why would you use Groudon with Drought when you could just use Koraidon with Orichalcum Pulse and get a 30% attack boost? You can see the trend already that there are Pokemon added in the recent games that are already overshadowing the OGs. With Koraidon being considered a better Sunsetter than Groudon, and Lunala having a better ability than a Pokemon like Lugia, some of these old Pokemon seem like they will never have a chance again. But when you're choosing a Pokemon over another, you need to think about what it can do that its counterpart cannot. And when it comes down to a Koraidon against a Groudon, Groudon can KO 2 Pokemon at once, and Koraidon can't. And that's why we're going to talk about the move pool. See, Koraidon's signature move is Collision Course. This is a 100 base power fighting type move that deals bonus damage when it is super effective. This puts Koraidon in a very similar situation to Groudon, where it is not boosted by the sun. This means Koraidon is usually inclined to terastallize into a fire type and just use Flare Blitz instead. However, the problem with both of these moves is they are single target. Groudon, on the other hand, gets access to the move Precipice Blades. This is an extremely powerful ground type move that hits both opposing Pokemon, but it has 85% accuracy. This allows Groudon to pressure both opposing Pokemon, whereas Koraidon can only pressure one at a time. In the same situation is Kyogre, who has the exact same move, just water type. This is called Origin Pulse, it is 120 base power and has 85% accuracy. But Kyogre's move pool is considered significantly better than Groudon's. But when they have the same signature move, how does this make sense? Well, Kyogre and Groudon both get access to the moves that scale off of your HP. These moves are called Eruption and Water Spout, which are Fire type and Water type respectively. Now, at full HP, both of these moves are 150 base power and hit both opposing Pokemon. They are also both boosted by their respective weather conditions. So why is Kyogre's so much better? Well, there's two reasons for this. Groudon is a ground type, not a fire type, meaning that Groudon loses the same type attack bonus on Eruption that Kyogre would otherwise get on Water Spout. This weakens the power considerably. The second reason is that Eruption is a special move, not a physical move. Remember earlier in the video when I said Groudon could be used as a special attacker? It is strictly because of the move Eruption. If Groudon's attack stat and special attack stat were flipped, and Groudon was always a ground and fire type like it is in its primal form, Groudon's usage rate would skyrocket. And this just goes to show that with Groudon and Koraidon, having the best moves doesn't always translate to having the most useful moves. And then we get to Pokemon like Calyrex. So when Calyrex is fused with either Spectrier or Glastrier, it gains access to the move Astral Barrage or Glacial Lance. These moves are 120 base power and hit both opposing Pokemon. But remember how I said that Precipice Blades and Origin Pulse are 85% accurate to counteract this overpowered move? Well, with these horses, they actually can't miss. It's 100% accurate, which is really cool. Additionally, Groudon and Kyogre have a 90 speed stat, meaning that they need support to get to the point where they can use these 85% accurate moves effectively in order to just miss them and lose the battle. But Calyrex Shadow has 150 speed, meaning you can load into the battle, click Astral Barrage, and win the game on turn 1. Because there is a 0% chance you're going to miss, and there is a 1% chance you're going to be outsped. Now, I know you understand why that's overpowered, so we're going to move on. Zacian and Zamazenta get access to the moves Behemoth Blade and Behemoth Bash, which are actually just Iron Head that gets transformed when they use their signature items. These moves originally did bonus damage to Dynamax Pokemon, but because Dynamax isn't in the game, they currently just have 100 base power and don't have any secondary effects. But Zacian is very limited in its move pool, being a physical fairy attacker. This means that its strongest fairy type stab is Play Rough, which is 90 base power and 90% accurate. This counteracts its great ability and its great attack stat. And its counterpart Zamazenta gets access to the move Body Press as well as the ability that raises its defense by 1 stage. But Zamazenta is a legendary Pokemon that we talked about as being a secondary restricted legendary. This is because Zamazenta is incredibly hard to kill and gets access to the move Wide Guard. Remember all those moves I've listed that hit multiple Pokemon? Well, Zamazenta using Wide Guard can stop those moves from connecting. And unlike the move Protect, you can use Wide Guard as many times consecutively as you need. Meaning if you think your opposing Kyogre is going to use Water Spout, you can use Wide Guard and that move will not make contact with your team. This is a move that is also attainable by Lunala and Solgaleo, which are both Pokemon that have a signature move that has 100 base power and hits a single target. These moves are Sunsteel Strike and Moongeist Beam, but neither of them are the reason that these Pokemon are played. In all fairness, Solgaleo really isn't played unless it is fused with Necrozma. But Lunala gets access to a move that is very powerful and can set you up for the rest of the battle. This move is Meteor Beam, which takes 1 turn to charge, raises the user's special attack stat by 1 stage, and then fires off on the next turn. But if Lunala uses the Power Herb, it can use this move in 1 turn. Now this move is 120 base power and guarantees you will be attacking at either +1 or neutral given you had a special attack drop. This combined with Lunala's ability Shadow Shield almost guarantees that it will get the move off before dying, as it is almost impossible to kill in 1 turn. Pokemon like Miraidon and Terapagos have very strong signature moves. Unlike Koraidon, Miraidon's signature move is boosted by its condition that it sets up. This means that Miraidon's signature move of Electro Drift is boosted both by the electric terrain and its ability Hadron Engine. This is a 100 base power move that does bonus damage when it is super effective, as well as having a 30% boost from terrain and 30% boost from an ability. This can one-shot Pokemon that even resist it. But Terapagos, on the other hand, has a very different signature move. This is a 120 base power move called Terra Starstorm. This move is normal type, meaning it cannot do super effective damage until Terapagos terrestrializes. Because you see, Terapagos is locked into the Stellar Terra type. and Terra Starstorm turns Stellar type when it's terastallized. This means that Terapagos can deal super effective damage against any Pokemon that is terastallized on the opponent's side of the field. In addition to that, Terapagos gets a 1.2 times power boost when it terastallizes, and Terra Starstorm turns into a spread move when it's terastallized. This of course means that Terra Starstorm now hits both opposing Pokemon. Kyurem, when it is fused with either Zekrom or Reshiram, gets access to their signature moves. These moves are both 100 base power in Fusion Bolt and Fusion Flare, and they are Fire type and Electric type respectively. The problem comes when Kyurem Black and Kyurem White do not have the stab access for these moves. This is because no matter which way Kyurem fuses, it keeps the Dragon Ice combination. This means that Kyurem White is really only good for spamming Blizzard in the snow, and Kyurem Black really isn't good. Both Kyurem forms, however, do get access to signature moves that take 2 turns to charge, similar to the Meteor Beam we talked about on Lunala. These moves are Ice Burn and Freeze Shock, and they are 140 base power. The problem comes in when you find out that their secondary effect is just a 30% chance to burn or paralyze, whereas Meteor Beam raises your attacking stat. Overall, this just isn't worth using the Power Herb item, as other moves like Meteor Beam or Xerneas' Geomancy bring an immediate value the second you click the button. If you use Meteor Beam on Lunala and the opponent protects, you still get the +1 at special attack boost. If your opponent protects from your Freeze Shock, you lose. On a different note, Ho-Oh has an incredible move in Sacred Fire. This is a very strong physical fire type attack, which leaves a 50% chance to burn the target. This of course can miss, but it's a much safer option than using something like Flare Blitz. This, combined with the ability to set up Tailwind and using Brave Bird for a strong stab flying type attack, Ho-Oh brings a very strong move pool to the current meta. And back to the opposite side, Giratina, Dialga, and Palkia have notoriously bad move pools. Dialga has access to the signature move Roar of Time, which is 150 base power and requires a recharge on the next turn. This is very similar to the effects of Hyper Beam and Giga Impact. Palkia, on the other hand, has the access to the move Spatial Rend. This is just a 100 base power move with an increased critical hit ratio and 95% accuracy. Palkia is really only ever brought for its 4 times resistance to Kyogre's Water Spout, which makes having Spatial Rend just a bonus way to deal damage. Dialga, however, has struggled to find its niche over time, and having to choose between weak old Dragon Pulse and Draco Meteor, which lowers your special attack by 2 stages, just isn't what you want coming from that massive special attack stat. Giratina brings 2 things that the others cannot, and that is incredible staying power with the massive HP and defense stats, as well as a great supporting move pool with Thunder Wave, Will-O-Wisp, and all that jazz. The problem is Giratina has the Ghost typing and terrible Ghost type moves. And if you want to unlock that offensive part of him, you need to get rid of the defenses by switching to the Origin form. Additionally, you do not want to waste your strong restricted slot on a support Pokemon. Pokemon like Zamazenta and Lunala are considered quote-unquote support because they have access to Wide Guard, Tailwind, and all that, but they also deal insane amounts of damage. Giratina, on the other hand, is just supportive. It does no damage. And then there are Pokemon like Lugia who have fallen victims to power creep and just rely on spamming Calm Mind until you get to +6/+6, and then you're able to finally kill things. It has access to the move Aeroblast, which is its signature move, but it is again single target and it is flying type. It is very similar to Palkia's Spatial Rend. It is 100 base power, 95% accurate, and has an increased critical hit ratio. Man, I wish Lugia was better. But we have seen Pokemon like Zacian and Xerneas absolutely take over the entire world. What makes them so much better than the other restricted Pokemon? And in all honesty, the number one thing that makes a restricted Pokemon great in comparison to its companions is being added in newer generations. The power creep has gotten so bad that there is no point to ever click on the Mewtwo icon in your boxes when there is a Calyrex Shadow Rider option instead. The Pokemon that take over the world have either a new mechanic added in the generation that they're playing in, or they themselves were added in that generation. Zacian absolutely dominated the 1 year that it was legal in Sword and Shield. There's a reason that Xerneas isn't in the games right now, and that is due to balancing problems. Even Groudon and Kyogre saw their most results when they were Primal form, which was a new mechanic added alongside Megas in the ORAS games. For reference, Primal Groudon being a ground fire type was only weak to ground, because its ability Desolate Land nullified all water type moves from ever going off. This is why we see so much play from Pokemon like Terapagos, Miraidon, Koraidon, and the Calyrex Riders right now. This is because we have yet to have any balance changes because we have to wait until the next game comes out. We saw Zacian get nerfed into the ground in its move from Sword and Shield to Scarlet and Violet. But with how many excellent team builders and players we have today, there are always going to be ways around this, and there are always going to be these off-meta or undercover Pokemon that end up winning tournaments. As we see regulations go on, I get less and less surprised when I see these new Pokemon winning. This is because with every legendary Pokemon having a different move pool and different abilities, they can combine and force different Pokemon in and out of the meta. A Pokemon like Calyrex Shadow Rider at one point ran the game and is now dropping in usage rate because people are bringing more and more counters for it. This is why we saw a Pokemon as obscure as Ho-Oh jump up in usage rate recently because it fits so well into the meta. Overall, any Pokemon with a good enough ability and good enough base stats can be used at any given time, but the restricted Pokemon from the last 2 or 3 generations will always be stronger than those that were originally here. Now, so far in Regulation I, we have seen a bit of play from some obscure Pokemon. Wolf Glick, of course, competed in the Grand Challenge with a Origin form Dialga. Of course, Ho-Oh and Lunala have been very common on Miraidon teams. Rayquaza and Eternatus will always be off-meta threats as a random Pokemon that can be thrown in that can throw everything off for a regular team's game plan. But we saw Duskmane Necrozma get a very good placement at a recent tournament. This is the Pokemon I'm most excited about in this regulation, as it does have a great matchup into so many of the restricted Pokemon that are currently being run. This in addition to the fact that Terra Fairy is the most common Terra for legendary Pokemon, and with Sunsteel Strike it can hit all of them for super effective damage. But overall, the stats don't matter all that much when it comes down to legendary Pokemon. Because they are all designed to be so strong, there is always going to be a way to use every single Pokemon, besides Mewtwo, in an effective way. So what makes a legendary Pokemon great? The combination of its stats, ability, and move pool allow it to find a role on any given team, but it needs to provide value in a way that another restricted Pokemon cannot provide better. This can be through their typing or a specific matchup that they automatically win. This is why we saw Pokemon like Rayquaza win the World Championships in a meta that was dominated by Kyogre and Groudon. So, are there any restricteds you could see sneaking into the top cut in the World Championships this summer? Let me know in the comments. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed. It lets me and YouTube know that you want to see more of this. And as always, have a great day.